And despite the bloodthirsty MSM prematurely penning his obituary, I think Boris Johnson will feel emboldened by his performance in front of the Partygate Kangaroo Court yesterday. And former leader of the House, former Business Secretary, my GBNews colleague Jacob Rees-Mogg, believes he'll have no concerns if the witch hunt is successful in sparking a by-election. Watch.
I think Boris has won in the court of public opinion, and that's ultimately for politicians what matters.
Do you think he'd win a by-election?
Oh, yes, but I doubt a by-election will be necessary.
Boris has himself cast doubt on whether he would even accept the Kangaroo Court's verdict. Here he is during yesterday's hearing.
So you wouldn't categorise it as a witch hunt or a kangaroo court?
I will wait to see how you proceed with the evidence that you have. I will study your conclusions from the evidence. I deprecate the terms that you have used. Either way, I believe that if you study this evidence impartially, you will come to the conclusion that I've given.
So what do you think? Should Boris Johnson reject the verdict of the Partygate Privileges Committee? Let me know by emailing me, dan@gbnews.uk. Tweet me at GBNews, a poll running there too. And doing battle on this now, former transport advisor to Boris Johnson, Colville Ranger, ex-Conservative MEP and a staunch Boris ally, David Campbell Bannerman, and the broadcaster and journalist Nina Myskow. So, David Campbell Bannerman, surely Boris shouldn't accept the verdict of the Privileges Committee. I've said for months I think the verdict was decided before they took a scrap of evidence, and they've changed the goalposts, they've changed the rules. So why should he give this kangaroo court legitimacy?
Well, Dan, it's great to be back. Just to say, you're right. I mean, there were 3 tweets that Harriet Harman made, and she shouldn't really have chaired the thing. So I think you're right on that. Well, it's a complex process. If the Privileges Committee do rule against him, there should be a vote in Parliament, and hopefully MPs will then overturn it, or certainly Tory MPs will. I think the consequences of bringing down Boris to them would be personally very damaging and possibly terminal. So you've got that stage. And then, of course, someone has to get a petition together. Maybe Sue Gray's son, allegedly, the campaign manager in Uxbridge, would get it together and you'd have a by-election. And Boris may not stand, of course. He might maybe go to another seat. That's a possibility, and maybe a safer seat, inverted commas. So there's lots of angles on this, but hopefully the Privilege Committee will do their job. They are representing the whole of Parliament, and I think, it's very important they get this right, because if you start saying these vague terms about recklessly misleading or whatever, then every minister in future or official advice...
It's a joke.
Will
it's
not
a joke.
be able to...
And it's chilling for democracy. But Colville Ranger, I believe the verdict is fixed. I believe it's set. We know what it's going to be. I mean, Nadine Dorries, one of Boris's great allies, former Culture Secretary, has come out tonight and said he will be found guilty.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Dan, from what people saw yesterday, it didn't feel like on that committee there was an even-handedness in dealing with the former Prime Minister. Yeah, and you're smiling, I'm smiling. People watched it and could see that, is this really a fair examination of this man? He's giving his evidence, and all it felt like was an attack. It didn't feel like looking for a fair, balanced view of the facts. And there isn't, as you've said, a shred of evidence as yet. Now, let's see, as Boris has said, let's see what evidence they get. Let's see what they put in front of themselves around whether it was knowing and whether it was reckless. Boris Johnson himself was absolutely crystal clear. He had his time to put it on the record that he did not knowingly and he did not recklessly. And I think this is the fact.
Exactly.
These are the facts. There's lots of colour thrown on this by other
exactly.
people.
They are the facts. But the problem is the goalposts have been moved so many times to make this a joke, in my opinion. So, Nina Myskow, why on earth should Boris have to accept this verdict? He's made it very clear he doesn't agree with the way that the Privileges Committee has done their business. He shouldn't accept it, should he? He doesn't have to legitimise this joke of a process.
Because it's democracy in action.
How?
It's because it's a committee that was set up for Parliament, by Parliament. Nobody voted against it. Nobody voted against Harriet Harman as chair. Nobody did anything. And watching it yesterday, I thought it was entirely even-handed. It was totally transparent. A kangaroo court is held behind closed doors. This was for everybody to see, to watch Boris blustering, getting testy, getting cross. And the thing is, you know, if you are telling the truth, you don't need a hotshot lawyer at hundreds of thousands of pounds to tell you what to say.
I'm sorry, Nina. You do when you have the entire Westminster establishment
to get testy. You will represent yourself, and you will do everything to make sure your reputation.
Well, of course, but you don't need to be rehearsed. You don't need to. Of course, he's being attacked. You don't need to be rehearsed. You know what the truth is. The trouble with Boris is that he's always been a liar. He's been caught out at lying in all aspects of his life. He was dumped from his first job for lying. I think it was at the Times or the Sunday Times. He's lied to his wives, his women.
One of his
other complaints about Boris. They're using this not about the issue at hand, about the point of whether Parliament has been misled, but to bring all these other issues that they may have against him personally, decisions he's made previously. He's been an amazing, once-in-a-generation politician.
But Nina, you just did. Nina, in fairness, that's exactly what you just did. We're talking about a very specific point over whether he misled Parliament knowingly or recklessly. And you talk about his marriages. So, Nina, let me put it to you. Let's just be honest, Nina. Just be honest. You just hate the guy.
I don't hate the guy.
You're bitter about the guy because he delivered
He's
Brexit,
an amazing
and you're a
man.
massive Ramona. You hate the bloke.
I don't hate him. Culver is quite right. He's a once-in-a-generation person. He is an extraordinary man. He's incredibly charismatic. He's got a brain the size of the planet. He's got a vocabulary, real classical education, and very, very, very funny. But what he lacks in terms of a leader or somebody who should be in charge of what happens to people's lives is that he has no integrity. Where are his morals?
Where are his... to push the referendum?
Yes, because
won the leadership.
Yes, of course.
Colville, Nina, let David come in. Let David come in here.
The idea that this was fair yesterday, I mean, comparing number 10 to a speedometer, where you've got a very handy guide to what's going on, when you've got hundreds of officials, thousands of officials all working on things, is a complete joke. And there's Bernard Jenkins going on about it should have been obvious. I mean, well, you know, it's like, is it obvious to prime ministers what's happening in every NHS hospital around the country?
No,
I mean,
but he's not living in an NHS hospital. He is living in number 10. And although it may be a large place, if there is a party that goes on till 4 a.m., people are throwing up in the cabinet room, his son's swing broken, suitcases of wine, and he should know. He must have known. He knew very well, but that was...
Nina, can I just recommend something? Go and read the 52 pages of evidence that Boris submitted to the committee, because I think you didn't get a fair and accurate portrayal yesterday.
And
because the committee members had an agenda. But if you go away, Nina, and read that 52 pages of evidence like I did earlier this week, I promise you will come away absolutely, resolutely clear that he didn't knowingly or recklessly mislead Parliament. That's all that matters. It actually doesn't matter what happened at the parties. This is about, did he knowingly and recklessly mislead Parliament?
It does matter, because did he knowingly mislead Parliament? Now, the point I was making about him being a liar was that I've read from people who know him well, ex-girlfriends, who say that the trouble with Boris is that he's had to lie to get out of it. And by the time, within 24 hours, he's convinced himself that the lie is true.
OK, final word to Colville.
If we talk about ex-girlfriends as character references for anyone, you know, this doesn't make sense. This is not a serious conversation.
No, Nina, they might.
It is a serious conversation.
Might have a reason to have a particular
Jacob Rees-Mogg is completely wrong. The country is against him. Over 2/3 of the country think he's lied.
David, final word to you. Final word,
David. He will not be. If he stood, Nina, he would not be voted back in.
Final word to David, Nina.
The left fear Boris because he delivered Brexit and he can still win. And I believe he will come back in whatever guise, you know, he will come back. And, this is a bit farcical, this whole analysis, this whole procedure. And it's very unfair. And, for instance, he never got any cake. It was his advisors that ate the cake. They didn't even
We're not talking
know.
about, we're not talking about
that the
cake.
birthday party was going to
We're
be
not
planned.
talking
Okay, look,
about
I'm going to
cake.
leave it there. Thank you all so much. That was former Transport Advisor to Boris Johnson, Colvare Ranger, ex-Conservative MEP, a staunch Boris ally, always David Campbell-Bannerman, and the broadcaster and journalist Nina Myskow. But who do you agree with? Should Boris Johnson reject the verdict of the Partygate Privileges Committee? Mark on Twitter says it's not an honest verdict if they had already decided prior to joining the committee that Boris was guilty. It's just a kangaroo court verging on a lynching. From Paul, Boris is guilty and they should suspend him from Parliament for 10 days. He'd then have to survive a by-election, which he won't win. Adios, Boris. And from John, Blair lied to the House on weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, which led to 500,000 deaths. Johnson eats cake. Well, actually, as David pointed out, he didn't even eat the cake and gets stitched up. And your verdict is now in. Wow, 56% of you say Boris should reject the verdict of the Partygate Kangaroo Court. 44% of you say he needs to accept it.